Hi everyone, my name is Scott Holstein and I'm the Director of Marketing and Business Development for Computrols. Thank you all for attending our webinar today. As you probably know, Computrols is a manufacturer of building automation systems. You'll primarily find our technology in commercial real estate, hospitals, data centers, and higher education facilities. Some of our more prominent customers include the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, Williams Tower, Chase Tower, Harrah's Hotel and Casino, and the Mercedes-Benz Superdome. In addition to our headquarters just outside of New Orleans, Louisiana, Computrols also has branch offices in Southern California, Houston, San Antonio, and Washington, D.C. We also support our customers both domestically and internationally through our service and distribution partner network. Since the company began 35 years ago, it's been our mission to empower our customers to manage their own building automation system, and that's the topic we're going to discuss quite a bit here today. Our goal for today's webinar is to make you aware of some additional costs to expect beyond the initial purchase of your building automation system, and which of those costs you might be able to mitigate by choosing the right system or the right service partner for you. We're going to do our best to get through all of this information in about 30 minutes or so and leave some time for questions at the end. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, my name is Scott Holstein. I've been working with Computrols for just about 3 years now. The company manufactures building automation controls for HVAC, lighting, access, and fire alarm systems. And Computrols is best known for our lifetime warranty controllers, simple-to-use software, and our unique ability to integrate to open and proprietary third-party building automation systems. This topic's really important because all too often we split up the cost of a building automation system into first cost and operational cost, and the groups making these decisions aren't always communicating and on the same page. In life, when we make a long-term or large-scale purchasing decision, we don't necessarily choose the cheapest option. So as an example of that, I think everyone can relate to purchasing a mattress. You spend a third of your life sleeping. Some of us spend probably a little bit more. Most of us probably spend a little bit less. But you're going to spend quite a bit of time on your mattress, and your mattress is something that you're going to have a very long time. Most mattresses, if you take care of them, will last 10 plus years. And we all know how important sleep is to our day-to-day life, our health, our happiness. So investing in a mattress seems to make sense. And same goes for an automobile. So your car or your truck is going to be a big part of your life, particularly if you're commuting to work every day or you're picking up your kids from school. You want to make sure that you have a car that's dependable, that you're not going to have to worry about, bringing in for maintenance on a regular basis. A car is a big investment. It's something that you're going to have to deal with on a daily basis. You're going to have it for probably 5 or more years. And when you think about some of the ongoing costs of a car besides the regular maintenance, you think about, what is the gas mileage that you get? If you get a vehicle made by certain manufacturers, you might have to take that vehicle to the manufacturer or to a special mechanic to get it worked on. So you think about those ongoing costs. And then finally, an example that may not be for everyone is plastic surgery. But even if you're not someone who would get plastic surgery, I'm sure you can relate that you probably wouldn't choose the cheapest doctor to do an operation on your face or your body or any part of you, really. And you think about, the common factors here. This is something that you're going to really depend on on a day-to-day basis. It's going to determine your happiness, how people treat you, and ultimately, if it's not done right, it could really cost you a lot of money and a lot of misery as time goes on. So the reason I bring these 3 examples up is because everyone can relate to buying a mattress, a car, and some people can relate to having some plastic surgery done. But for some reason, we look at these purchases and we say, all right, this is something that we're willing to invest in, and this is why. And I think the common factors of these 3 items and a building automation system are the time you spend using the product on a daily basis. You're going to use your building automation system a couple times a day, if not more, maybe a few times a week at the very least. So it's something that you're going to have to deal with on a daily basis. It's also something that's going to determine the safety and health of your building occupants. So much like a mattress or any of these examples, you're going to be determining people's day-to-day happiness based on what kind of system you have and how well you're able to manage that system. And then there's the ongoing expenses. I think you think about ongoing expenses for a vehicle are really the ones that come up the most. Is how often am I going to have to get this thing fixed? Because certain vehicles do have a reputation for lasting a bit longer. I think that's something that factors into people's decision when they go to purchase a car or truck. And then finally, how long you're going to own the product. A building automation system is likely going to be in your building a minimum of 5 years, as many as 20 or 30 or even more. So there's some common factors here, and we really want to look at these factors, particularly the ongoing expenses as time goes on. So in our presentation today, we'll touch on the initial investment. We'll talk about the initial investment in a building automation system for new construction versus existing buildings. Talk about what your options are in those situations. We'll talk about the ongoing expenses and what needs to be considered, what needs to be budgeted for as time goes on, and also some things you might be able to take on in-house that could save you in the long run. And then, of course, we'll give you some questions to ask your potential vendors as well. When you're trying to figure out what's the best investment in terms of a building automation system, it's not always an easy decision. So we'll give you some questions to ask your vendors to vet them and get a better sense of what they have to offer. Then we'll talk about justifying costs, specifically around energy usage, and then incentives and some other things as well. And then we'll talk about trying to future-proof your building. When you're talking about the life cycle cost of anything, you have to consider as time changes, technology changes, and what is that going to look like in 10 years from now, and is my current building automation system going to be able to handle it? And then finally, getting your organization on board. All too often, there are separate departments. There's a department for making the initial purchase, and then there are O&M teams, and those departments work separately. They have separate budgets. So we'll talk about how to get everybody on the same page. So the initial investment for new construction is a pretty straightforward process. Generally, you have a general contractor who goes out and hires a mechanical contractor, and the mechanical contractor often goes out and hires a controls contractor. Well, the mechanical contractor has a pretty good idea that he or she needs to be one of the lowest bidders to win that work. So as a result, they're going to go out there and find a controls contractor who's going to be one of the lowest bidders to make their bid one of the lowest bids. And at the end of the day, you have to think, is that really what I want with a building automation system? It's one thing when you're talking about ceiling tiles or something that is a little bit easier to install and service over time. That's not going to have as big of an effect on your day-to-day and the occupants in your building's day-to-day. So your building automation system vendor is going to be in your building on a regular basis, and they're going to determine a lot in terms of the comfort, safety, and health of your building occupants. So it's not quite apples to apples when you're comparing vendors in the case of new construction. Now, existing buildings are a little bit trickier. So existing buildings typically are going to have a building automation system in place, and maybe you're looking to make a change or an improvement in some way. So integration is the first option, and probably the most economical option off the bat. Integration allows you to leverage the majority of your existing infrastructure and replace the head-end computer and maybe a couple of controllers on the supervisory level. So this strategy is definitely going to save you money in the short term, is likely going to give you a lot of the functionality you might be looking for and fix some of the issues, but you have to keep in mind the path moving forward. So if you go and integrate to a legacy building automation system, what happens when those controllers begin to fail? Do you have another hardware solution lined up behind that, which is going to work with your integration solution? From there, you have upgrading. If you're going to upgrade with your existing vendor, you'll probably be upgrading controllers and software. And sometimes it'll be all the controllers, other times it'll be just the supervisory level controllers. But essentially, you're going to get hopefully some kind of upgrade in functionality and your ability to control the building with this. And then finally, it's replacing everything, which is going to be your most expensive option. But if you're in a scenario where you have outdated technology, let's say you have pneumatics or your building automation system is causing your building occupants discomfort, this may be your best option. So the bulk of our presentation today is going to focus on ongoing expenses, and we look at things like operational costs. And operational costs, we think, okay, what does it cost me to run my building automation system? So we'll talk a little bit about that, but we're also going to discuss what goes into, what are you getting taken away from when you have to go and run a hot and cold call, or you have to go and try to figure out, what's going on with my system right now and what do I need to do to fix it. It's not necessarily just the cost of what you're doing, it's also the cost of what you're not doing. And then we'll talk a little bit about planning for hardware failure. We'll talk about planned obsolescence, which is a major issue in the building automation industry. We'll talk about energy costs and savings. And then as we go through this, we'll talk about what you can do in-house. And a lot of that is going to depend on your situation. We're all asked to do more with less these days. And in many scenarios, you're running large facilities and you may not have enough hands on deck or enough skilled hands on deck to be able to handle a building automation system in-house. So operational costs, this is a classic 80-20 rule. About 20% of facility managers use 80% of the available capabilities of their BMS. And it's not really that big of a surprise because, frankly, building automation systems can be complex. They can be difficult to manage. A lot of times there's limited ability to make changes within those systems. So these numbers are not terribly surprising, but facility managers are really the most qualified individuals in many cases to run their building automation system. And it's not because they have more knowledge of the system or HVAC or whatever systems they might be running. It's because they're in the building on a day-to-day basis. They see the little things that change in the building seasonally or by the time of day or for certain tenants. Having to constantly make changes to a building automation system, like I said, it's not just the time you spend doing it, it's the time that you could have spent doing something else. And I think from an operational perspective, a lot of property managers and owners can appreciate that. So in case you can't read this cartoon here, it says the warranty is for the life of the vehicle, but we're not responsible if the vehicle doesn't live very long. Hardware failure is something that you're going to have to deal with. In large facilities, you might have hundreds or thousands of controllers, sensors, and end devices. And even at a really small failure rate, you're still replacing quite a few devices on a regular basis, and this is something you really need to budget for. And it's also something to pay attention to when you're looking at the warranty. You really need to read the fine print here to figure out what does the warranty actually cover, how long does it cover it, and what, if I do anything to make any changes to my system, is going to void that warranty. And you may also want to find out, will the warranty transfer if the building sells? Product obsolescence is a problem that has plagued the building automation industry for the last probably 30 years. And product obsolescence is something I think we're all familiar with in our day-to-day lives. It's the reason why not a lot of people have a cell phone that is more than 3 or 4 years old. Frankly, I don't think I know anyone who has a cell phone that's 4 years old. It's just not the way that cell phone companies operate these days. So an example might be if you have an older cell phone and you know that they've come out with newer models, the software upgrades that you're downloading, they're not necessarily built for your phone. They're built for the newer models of phone. And this is something we see across the board in electronics, where companies just really stop supporting those products. But in building automation, a lot of times companies will stop manufacturing a product and the new product will not be backward compatible with your previous building automation system. So you have to know what the obsolescence track looks like for the system you're purchasing. We had a client who said that he had a system that was installed 2 years before he got there, and when he arrived, the building automation vendor was telling him, look, this system is now obsolete, you need to upgrade to our latest technology. And It was a 2-year-old system. It was working fine, as building automation systems do. They do their jobs. They open valves. They modulate dampers. They turn things on and off. So he was wondering, what am I going to get out of a new building automation system? And the answer they gave him was not much. Basically, you're going to have support because you're going to have the newer technology, and that's what we're going to be supporting going forward. So rather than do that, he did find Computrols, but for a little while there, he was sending his controllers off to a third party for repair, and eventually the chips on the controllers weren't even available anymore. So there wasn't even an opportunity to repair those controllers or maintain that system. So when you talk to a potential building automation service provider, make sure you ask the question, will I be able to use this system in 5 years? And then if they're telling you they want you to upgrade, make sure you understand the benefits of upgrading, because oftentimes they throw on some bells and whistles, but it's not really something you might necessarily need. Definitely something to keep an eye out for is how long has this product been on the market, and when do you plan to obsolete the product? Something else to consider when looking at a new building automation system is, what are your plans as a facility to scale this system up? Are you going to expand the building automation system at some point? Are you going to add new sensors? Are you going to add maybe a new wing to your hospital or a new building to your campus? You have to keep this in mind, because adding new components brings on a couple of different things. First of all, there's the labor of actually doing that. In some building automation systems, you might be able to go and install a new temperature humidity sensor yourself. You have to look at what the cost and the savings are there to see if it's worth your while to do that, but it might be worth a look. And then you also should consider the way that a lot of software is priced these days is by the number of points in your system. So if you're planning on expanding your building automation system another 10,000 points, what tier is that going to bring you to, and how much is that going to cost? So my belief is that a maintenance agreement should be correlated to the usability and the support you have with your building automation system. So if your building automation system is really easy to use, and your in-house staff can handle a lot of the day-to-day management, you don't really need a hefty building automation service contract, because you're going to be able to handle those smaller things in-house. You also have to consider what's included. Do you have some kind of phone support where maybe you can do some troubleshooting? Because a lot of maintenance contracts simply give you first access to service, where you're not put at the end of the line. You get to kind of skip the line to come and have somebody service your system, but there may be some additional cost to that as well. And then when you think about the size of your service contract, small service contracts, I think are probably a good thing to have in place, just so if there are things that come up with the system that you want to have a professional technician take a look at, it's not a bad thing to have somebody coming in there on a regular basis just to check it out. But then you look at some of the larger maintenance contracts that are out there, and they can end up costing you more than the initial system's install, just after a couple of years. So you want to try to find a system and a maintenance contract that suits your abilities to manage your building automation system. And then we look at the life of equipment and how building automation systems can affect this and affect really how much maintenance you need on this equipment. So I think we've all run into a situation or heard of a situation where you were recommissioning or retro-commissioning a building, and you find out that the building automation system is giving you bad data. So it says that your air handler or your light fixtures are off, and they're going off at 6 p.m. every day per the schedule that you put in there. But then you go and commission the building, and you see that it's continuing to run overnight. And not only are you losing a lot in terms of energy savings, but you're also losing a lot on the life of your equipment. You have to consider, what is it costing me to maintain this equipment when I don't get good information? And then how frequently am I going to have to replace the equipment if it's continuing to run 24/7? So I always put this disclaimer out there. Building automation systems do not save energy by themselves. Building automation systems typically do very similar things. Like I said, they open valves, they modulate dampers, they turn things off and on. And if you have a building automation system, no matter how old, if it's dialed in and doing what it's supposed to be doing, you're not going to save a lot on energy by upgrading to a new system. You might get some more functionality out of that, which may subsequently give you energy saving opportunities, but if your system's already dialed in, it's unlikely you're going to save a lot of energy in those situations. So again, I harp on having a facility manager that's going to be able to manage your building automation system is a huge advantage because they're in the building on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of times the technicians that come in, even if you do have the same technician that comes in on a regular basis, they don't see the building on a regular basis like you do. They don't see it on a daily basis, and they don't know the ins and outs necessarily. And then you have to think about when you're implementing energy saving strategies and you're looking at a payback period, if I have to invest more to have a technician come out and implement these strategies and do the analysis, how much am I really saving, and how much longer is that payback period going to be? Then we have liability costs such as cybersecurity. Most building automation systems today are connected to the internet in some way, and we know just how dangerous it can be having your information available in the cloud or online. It becomes accessible to people who maybe you don't want to have access to it. So my advice here would be get your IT department involved early when you're evaluating a building automation contractor, because a lot of times they can give the specifications and criteria that they need met, and that will make your decision after the sale a lot easier on how to implement all of this, because it'll all have been talked about ahead of time. Then we look at, part of a building automation system is the fire and life safety and access control systems. And then in the case of an emergency, you can't cut corners here. If you have some kind of an event and those systems fail, you'll be really kicking yourself for having gone with a less expensive system to try to cut some corners. In a less dramatic example, you also have commercial real estate tenants who are guaranteed a certain temperature range throughout the day. And if you're not meeting those parameters over a period of time, you may, or your property manager or your property owner may be obligated to compensate your tenants for not meeting those criteria. So something to keep in mind is a few of those liability costs that maybe aren't considered when you're making that initial purchase. And then there are non-monetary costs, particularly for corporate-run facilities. You have to think about the level of productivity you're going to get out of employees based on the environment that you're providing. And this particularly comes into play with lighting and HVAC, because under the right circumstances, people are more productive, they're happier employees, they're probably going to stay longer, and potentially do more work for you. And we talk about justifying the cost, and I think we've touched on a lot of these as we've gone through here, but being able to accomplish energy savings in-house is a huge, huge advantage. And then you look at the operational costs, as we mentioned, the time it takes for running a hot and cold call, the time it takes where you're sitting there with your building automation technician trying to figure out what's going on and how to fix it. These are all things that take up your time from doing other things that might be more productive. But something we didn't talk about was incentives. There are a lot of energy-based incentives out there these days, both on a federal and state level, and even on a private level now. I've seen a lot of utility companies starting to offer incentives for energy-related upgrades. So building automation systems absolutely fall into this category. A lot of times you can, if you are out there and you're looking at different systems and you decide, look, this is what I want, but it's a little out of budget, you might be able to go out there and find some incentives that are able to help you justify that cost. Now, with these incentives, you have to keep in mind that a lot of them require benchmarking a year out from the actual project, so you can then prove that energy savings. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at incentives, is make sure that you can go back and pull that energy savings data. And finally, there's the residual value. And residual value for building automation systems is probably not as high as it should be. In most cases, when a building goes to be sold, the owners or the buyers, in this case, would be looking at how old is the building automation system, so they have an idea of what kind of warranty time they have left, what they can expect in terms of usability, and how many more years they can expect to have the system. And then also the energy use per square foot. That's probably the biggest one that building owners look at that have to do with the building automation system. So we always try to future-proof our buildings as much as we can. When we make investments, we want to make sure that this investment is going to work out long-term. And with building automation industry in general, we're hearing a lot about the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things is something that's been talked about for quite a while, but I feel like it's finally getting here. And it's an exciting time. But what you have to make sure of is that your building automation system is Internet of Things ready, so to speak, where when new technology does come out, you'll have the ability to add on to your building automation system, not have to start from scratch just to implement new technology. And then Power over Ethernet is another technology that has really taken off lately. Power over Ethernet is one of my favorites just because it's utilizing existing wiring in the building. Typically, Ethernet or Cat5 or Cat6 cable is used for communication. We're now able to inject power into that cable and power some low energy light bulbs, some access control. I've even heard of VAVs that are being powered by Power over Ethernet as well now. So we're going to start to see more and more of those products, I think, but it's a technology that is really becoming very prominent. And then we hear a lot now about machine learning and artificial intelligence. We've been hearing about big data for a really long time now as well, but machine learning and artificial intelligence are technologies that have been around for decades, but we're now only to the point where we can start utilizing this data and normalizing it for use in our buildings and be able to see, that you have some piece of equipment that is a little out of whack, and these machines can recognize these really large patterns in the data. But in terms of being future-proof for machine learning and artificial intelligence, there's not much to be worried about there. Machine learning and artificial intelligence are typically done at the cloud level, and that's because you need really substantial computer clusters to be able to process a lot of that data. So getting your organization on board, it's going to be a battle. A lot of people are adverse to change as a whole. Everyone today is looking at that first cost procurement approach, and I think a lot of progressive organizations are starting to say, what can we do to consider the life cycle cost of these big investments that we're making, and it's really an organizational mission and vision that really comes into play. Like I said, all too often you have your purchasing department and your O&M team making their own decisions. They have their own budgets, and they're not really working side by side the way that they should. So a lot of times if you're trying to get your purchasing team to invest a lot on the front end, explaining to them the costs on the back end might be helpful, but really the change is going to come when you have a common goal. So before we take questions, I wanted to let everybody know that we're going to have a webinar on Wednesday, January 16th at 1 p.m. It's going to be hosted by our Manager of Strategic Partnerships, Mike Clayton. Mike's going to cover the architecture and software of Computrols' building automation system. So if you're interested in seeing the software and hardware for yourself, I think that would be a good one to attend. And then I also encourage everyone to go to our website and download our Lifecycle Cost ebook. It covers a lot of what we talked about here today and then some. But if you have any questions for us, please don't hesitate to email me directly. My email address is scott.holstein@computrols.com. And we appreciate you all joining us for the webinar today and look forward to having you in future webinars.